What if everything you feared about what comes after death has been completely wrong this whole time? What if, instead of dread and darkness, the greatest mystic of the medieval church was shown something so breathtakingly beautiful, so saturated in warmth and tenderness, that no human language has ever been fully adequate to contain it? That is exactly what happened to one woman, a woman who did not seek visions, who did not position herself as a prophet, but who was simply visited by grace so extraordinary that the Church herself has preserved her testimony for over 700 years. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear is not a warning. It is not a rebuke. It is an invitation, and it may just change the way you face every single morning for the rest of your life. Her name is Saint Gertrude the Great. Born in 13th century Germany, she entered the Benedictine monastery of Helfta as a young child and never left. She was not a queen. She was not a warrior or a theologian debating in the great halls of universities. She was a consecrated woman, hidden from the world, quietly devoted, and it was in that hiddenness that heaven came to her. She did not go looking for visions. She was, by her own admission, distracted in her early years, absorbed in literature, in philosophy, in the intellectual beauty of her studies. And then, on the evening of January 27, 1281, when she was 25 years old, everything changed. She described it herself. A young man appeared to her during a moment of personal distress, radiant beyond description, and spoke words that dismantled every anxiety she had ever carried. That encounter was the first thread of something that would become a tapestry of mystical experience unlike almost anything else recorded in the history of Christian spirituality. What makes Gertrude's revelation so distinct, so utterly different from the kind of spiritual content that tends to dominate the conversation, is their emotional register. We live in a world where religious fear is easy to find. Hellfire, judgment, the wrath of a God who is watching and measuring and waiting to condemn. And look, those are real theological realities that deserve serious engagement. But Gertrude was not shown that side of the divine mystery. What was revealed to her, again and again, through years of intimate mystical encounter, was the Sacred Heart of Jesus, not as a symbol of obligation, not as a demand, but as the living center of an infinite tenderness that exists specifically for the human soul. She described that heart as a place of refuge so complete, so all-encompassing, that the soul who enters it finds itself no longer capable of remembering its wounds. Not because the wounds never happened, but because love of that magnitude does not merely heal, it transforms. And what did she see of heaven itself? This is where things become almost impossible to put into words, and yet Gertrude tried. She wrote extensively in her work known as the Herald of Divine Love, and what emerges from those pages is a portrait of eternal life that bears no resemblance to the cold, abstract afterlife that sometimes gets preached from pulpits, or depicted in art. The heaven that was shown to Gertrude is not a static place of clouds and silence. It is movement. It is joy so active it vibrates. She described the souls of the redeemed not as passive recipients of divine reward but as beings fully alive, more alive than they had ever been on earth, engaged in a kind of eternal celebration that never exhausts itself because its source is inexhaustible. The joy does not diminish with time because there is no time. The wonder does not become familiar because what is infinite can never be fully grasped, and so every moment in that presence is simultaneously familiar and new. She wrote about the specific quality of light in that realm, not sunlight, not any light the physical eye has ever encountered, but a luminosity that carries within it something like personality. It is warm. It recognizes you. It does not simply illuminate your exterior, it passes through you. And as it passes through, it reveals the deepest truth of who you are, not the broken version you have always suspected yourself to be, but the version God has always seen. The version that was loved into existence before you took your first breath, the version that was held even in your darkest moments when you felt most certain that you were invisible or forgotten or beyond the reach of anything good. One of the most powerful threads in Gertrude's mystical testimony is what she describes as the experience of divine recognition. In heaven, she said, there is no longer any gap between who you are and who God knows you to be. That gap, the one you feel every time guilt rises up, every time you replay a memory you wish you could erase, Every time you look in the mirror and see the accumulated weight of your failures, that gap closes. Completely. Not because your history is erased, but because in the light of the Sacred Heart, every wound becomes a window. Every scar becomes evidence of the journey. And the God who waited for you at the end of that journey does not look at you with the critical eye of a disappointed judge. He looks at you the way a father looks at a child who has finally, after everything, come home. Gertrude experienced visions of the Virgin Mary as well, and what strikes any careful reader is how consistently those visions return to the theme of maternal comfort. Mary, in these revelations, is not distant or formal. She is present in the way a mother is present, instinctively, protectively, with a kind of love that does not need to be earned and cannot be withdrawn. And this too, Gertrude understood, is a reflection of something essential about the nature of the eternal home that awaits us. Heaven, in her testimony, is not a reward you receive for adequate performance. It is a relationship you are received into, a belonging so deep and so final that the soul, upon entering it, does not feel it has arrived somewhere new. It feels it has finally arrived somewhere it always should have been. There is something about the way Saint Gertrude writes about the peace of that place that is almost physically affecting when you read it slowly enough. She does not describe peace as the absence of conflict, as though heaven is simply a war that finally ended. She describes peace as a positive, living reality. A peace that fills, that saturates, that overflows. A peace that is not silence but a kind of music, not audible music, but the harmonic resolution of everything that was ever discordant in your life finally finding its proper key. Every relationship that broke. Every prayer that seemed to go unanswered. Every moment of incomprehensible suffering. In the light of that peace, she said, understanding comes, not as information but as experience. You feel why. And the why, when it comes, does not produce resentment. It produces gratitude so overwhelming that the soul breaks open into something it can only respond to with praise. This is the inheritance that the Christian faith holds out to every single person who has ever drawn breath. Not just to the great mystics. Not just to the canonized saints who appear in stained glass. To you? To the person watching this right now, perhaps in the middle of a season of life that feels anything but holy. Perhaps carrying grief that has gone on so long you have forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. Perhaps struggling with doubt, with questions that don't have clean answers, with a faith that sometimes feels like it is held together by nothing more than stubbornness, and the faint memory of a moment when God felt real. Gertrude's testimony does not ask you to have everything figured out. It asks you only to keep walking toward the heart that has never stopped walking toward you. Because here is what the visions of Saint Gertrude the Great ultimately reveal, not as doctrine, not as argument, but as lived spiritual experience passed down through centuries of prayer and preservation. The universe bends toward love. The arc of everything, of history, of your personal story, of the cosmos itself, curves in the direction of a tenderness so complete and so unconditional that no human heart has ever been able to fully receive it in this life. But one day, if you keep the faith, you will. One day the veil that separates the seen from the unseen will become transparent, and what has always been true, that you were loved beyond measure, that your life mattered, that none of your suffering was wasted, that every act of faithfulness was noticed and treasured, will become not something you believe but something you know with every faculty of your being. That is what waits at the end of the road. Not darkness. Not silence. Not an impersonal dissolution into the cosmos. But a welcome. Personal, intimate, radiant, and eternal. A welcome from a heart that has your name on it, that has always had your name on it, and that will never let you go. If this message stirred something in you, if it gave language to a hope you have been carrying quietly, or reminded you of a truth you needed to hear today, then you are exactly where you need to be. This channel exists to bring you more of this. More depth. More light. More content rooted in the richness of the mystical tradition of the Christian faith, explored with the kind of honesty and care that meets you where you actually are. Hit that subscribe button for living hope and turn on notifications, because every week we go deeper, into the saints, into the scriptures, into the testimonies of men and women across 20 centuries who encountered the living God and came back changed. You don't have to walk this road alone. We will walk it together.